I would like to welcome Barbara Chase-Riboud to the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive. It's really a welcome back for Barbara, who first exhibited here in 1973, and the sculpture about which we're going to be talking was commissioned for that very exhibition 40 years ago.
Well, to see it again, I'm amazed. You know, I was really, I really hadn't thought about the sculpture or you know, I hadn't seen it in the flesh for, as a matter of fact, that long. And so it was a surprise, and it was marvelous to see. There is a kind of confessionary aspect to this sculpture, of things that went before and of things that went after. And actually, the date of the sculpture is 1973. I had already been to the Far East. I had already been to China. I had already been to India and Egypt. And so there was this idea of history, of memory. And I had already done the first 4 Malcolms. And so I was in the midst of this big creative change in my work, and the you know, Confessions was simply a kind of an aside to what I was trying to do with the Malcolm Steles. And so they all have this basic graphic. There's a part which is always graphic because there's a part which is always written, and there's a text, and then there's the carving, or there's the sculpture, or there is, you know, the stone rubbing, et cetera, et cetera.
The sculpture, as you mentioned, is a combination of cast bronze and fabric and wool, braided, wound, spiraled, beautiful different wools that form a kind of, as you've referred to, a kind of skirt.
There were several reasons for this. The main reason was that my sculpture up until this time, or up until the Steles at least, was visually surrealistic. It always had a kind of reference to the human body and so on. And when I realized that, that the sculpture, the forms were really going in another direction, I had somehow to cut off the legs and get rid of the base, because that was what was, I thought, keeping the imagery as naturalistic and as humanistic as I didn't want it. And so one of the ways I decided was possible was simply to lift the whole abstract composition up onto an armature, and then you know, sort of hide the armature. And in order to hide the armature, I had to have something. And it seemed to me that the fabric, silk, wool was going to do it. And it couldn't be just a curtain. It had to, in itself, be a sculpture, and it had to have a movement which was graphic.
I think in many ways, even though you've talked about very eloquently how you left the figure, and yet there is the power and the magic of these sculptures has a reference to not individual humans, but to a humanity and a sense and a human dignity.
There is an aura which remains. I don't know how or why, but it's absolutely true that these personages, even though they're abstract, and even though, you know, I named the Malcolms after the fact, as a matter of fact, you do have this feeling that these are spirits that you are looking at them, but they are looking at you.
And in your monument drawings in this exhibition, you do include writing, actual writing, poetry, architectural elements, automatic writing. Could you tell us about that a little bit?
Well, the monument drawings started out as the kind of argument for or against the idea that there was a relationship between my drawing and my poetry. I'm a published poet, and from 1974 until now, I have written maybe 200 poems, published maybe 150, and I have always tried to separate the poetry from the drawings and from my visual art in general. And I had several critics who insisted that this was just not possible, that there was a relationship, and the drawings that I did, which I did in maybe 6-7 weeks, sort of prove their point, let's put it that way. And they include automatic writing, which is writing from right to left in the Arab manner. And then I included real poems. And then you have also architectural drawings, Piranesi-like sort of imaginative landscapes, imaginative architecture. And finally, you have the chords as well. You have the fabric. So I've tried to combine all these things into one drawing. And so there's this kind of conversation between the Steles, between the Tantra sculptures, and between a new series which is called La Musica, which is sort of a counterpart to the Steles, which continue to sort of march along on their own sort of treachery, and the kind of parentheses that sort of come out of this in a way and take maybe one element of the Steles and elaborates on it. Well, I almost opened this museum, and it looks like I'm almost closing the Berkeley Museum.
That's true. That's true.
40 years later, which I'm delighted to do because there's a new museum coming. Thank you for inviting me back.